What is up, everyone? It's your host, David Wells. We're here on the David Wells Experiment, and here's another episode. Man, could have come up with a better segue than that, lol. Anyway, so we're going to take a break from video games and we're going to talk about cinema instead. I'm going to be talking about two figures who were instrumental in the shaping of the art form that so many enjoy today. The two figures are going to be Alfred Hitchcock and Akira Kurosawa. Now, let's see. So, according to what I know about Alfred Hitchcock, he was born at the tail end of the, let's see, the 1900s. I want to look up I do know that Akira Kurosawa, he was born. Jeez, you can't even get to Wikipedia properly. Oh, yeah. So anyway, Akira Kurosawa, I believe, was born in 1910. I'm looking this information up as I'm doing this podcast. Let's see. And I know that, yes, March 23rd, 1910, and he lived till 1998. So he had a good, so he was born, he had a good 18 years after Alfred Hitchcock died. And Alfred Hitchcock, he was born 1899 and died in 1980. Dang, so they lived about the same time, but in slightly different eras. Alfred Hitchcock was about 10 years older, and Akira Kurosawa, let's see. So, all in all, Akira Kurosawa had about 10 years more life on him than Alfred Hitchcock. Huh, interesting. So, well, that's a good note to start on. Well, not a good note, but it shows that here were two gentlemen who they got to spend a lot of time with this craft. There were similarities, but there were differences as well. I think one of the great similarities is they were both born into empires, and like they both got to get into making movies at the infancy of the craft. So one of the things that's like a touchstone on Alfred Hitchcock is his fear of persecution, of being the wrong man or being found out. I think that's a real difference with Akira Kurosawa. I think there's a lack of fear in Kurosawa's movies as opposed to Hitchcock's. Because you have in an Alfred Hitchcock movie, something's going to get you. Whereas Akira Kurosawa, he's just like, there's something going to get you, but it's just a part of life. With Alfred Hitchcock, you think, okay, it's kind of, gods and angels and people are caught in the conflict, but in an Akira Kurosawa film, those conflicts just happen to be like viewed as like a force of nature, like it just has to be dealt with. There doesn't seem to be, although there can be sinister characters in his movies, it's not treated as being sinister. It's just like, it's more an observation of how things function. And yet there's always a silver lining. Like you could almost say that that Akira Kurosawa, I'm not saying that Alfred Hitchcock was an influence on him. I mean, he might have been, but I don't see that's the case. Now, Kurosawa, by his own accord, has gone on record saying that John Ford was an influence on him. I think with Alfred Hitchcock, you had that sort of dangerous element, and with Akira Kurosawa, you also have his work having that. But there's, say, the silver lining of almost Frank Capra thrown in there. And Frank Capra is one of those filmmakers who I feel like his movies are dark, not in a traditional way that you would think. Their darkness inhabits a Frank Capra movie in a similar way that blood flows through a person's body. You don't notice it's there until there's an absence. Like when you see a person alive and well, you don't think anything of it. But when they've died and you see the blood drained, you suddenly notice, like, oh wow, it was there all along. I feel that's the kind of darkness that are in Frank Capra movies, and that's no more prominently put than, say, It's a Wonderful Life. You do see the grim sort of circumstances of where they're living. I think Akira Kurosawa was similar in that regard. And they're both men of their times. They're both shaped by the influences of what happened. Although they came about it through totally different circumstances. Um, Alfred Hitchcock, he grew up in the silent pictures. And not just like towards the end of it, like Akira Kurosawa did. Um, Alfred Hitchcock was his first gig was in the silent pictures. He would write the little dialogue boxes, like when an actor would say something but they didn't have sound, it would then cut away to a title card being like, okay, this is what they said. Whereas Akira Kurosawa grew up with silent pictures, and by the time he entered the industry, they had already had sound, and Japan had already started military campaigns in the Pacific and across Asia. So, anyway, it's been said so much before, but one of the defining moments of Alfred Hitchcock's life was his dad sent him with a note to the police station, and he said, hand it to the police officer. And the police officer, he took him to a cell, locked him up for a few minutes, and said, this is what we do to naughty boys. Consequently, the great catalyst moment of Akira Kurosawa's life, if you read his biography, is he was privy to the Great Kanto earthquake of the 1920s. He saw it do immense physical damage to the surrounding areas, and he saw how people responded to it. He saw the worst aspects of humanity come about, and he recalled seeing like piles of bodies, and he wanted to look away, but his brother told him, no, take it all in. And it also has to be, man, that really must mess with people, but yeah. So right away, one Alfred Hitchcock, as the silent era progressed, he got to make more and more movies. But sound came along, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Alfred Hitchcock who directed Britain's first talkie picture, as they were called back then. Akira Kurosawa, on the other hand, he saw a flyer for work at Toho Studios, or what would eventually become Toho Studios, and he started going through the process of like training there. So eventually he got to do his own movie called Sanjuro, which was released towards the end of the Second World War. And it's basically about a martial artist who trains, and it was a huge hit, and he actually got a sequel. But one of the things he had to deal with was people constantly telling him how he was supposed to do things. The Japanese military at the time, like, severely edited. They had a lot of input to say, and a lot of it was mandatory. He had to fight so hard for so much, and even then, his vision was compromised. There was another movie he did. One thing that astounds me about Akira Kurosawa's work in that time is he made a movie called The Most Beautiful One, and it's basically about these factory workers and just it's in the backdrop of the movie is the war, but it's almost a slice of life movie about camaraderie and just daily going ons. And it's really interesting when you consider the time period that it was made in, that I think he even faced opposition from the Japanese military, calling it too American British. Like it was too sentimental. But a friend of his stuck up for him and they got to make the movie. Alfred Hitchcock had different issues to work with. In the British motion picture industry, he had to work with kind of a tight budget. He wanted a bigger canvas to paint on, and he knew he had to go to Hollywood. And first of all, but he also faced constraints in Hollywood first in the form of David O. Selznick, who basically wanted to take all the credit for anything Hitchcock did and had very strict demands of how to film something. Hitchcock worked around this by shooting the movie in such a particular way that you couldn't edit it any other way. And David O. Selznick, his career depended on Hitchcock because he would always just loan him out to other studios and have him do these pictures, and Hitch wanted to be free from that. So eventually he left David O. Selznick, and surprise, surprise, Selznick's career like evaporated. One of the things that's different though, so like the 50s were sort of their peak era when they were at the top of their game, but they took such there was a stark contrast in how they approached television. Akira Kurosawa, to the best of my knowledge, made no effort to venture into TV. I don't know if he hated it or if it was just not the medium he wanted to work in. Whereas Alfred Hitchcock, he embraced it fully and used it as a way to develop clout and fame. And it was how he wound up being able to make Psycho because he got so much money from that that and when the studios refused to help him, he just used the crew from the Alfred Hitchcock Hour Presents show and they made Psycho. So they both kind of had these peaks from like the 50s and 60s. The 60s is actually where Akira Kurosawa's career began to decline. It was because television showed it was a real adversary to the theatrical experience in Japan at the time. Whereas in America, TV just helped Alfred Hitchcock reach more people, although eventually his career also did start to wind down. And he would only make a couple more movies in the 70s. Actually, his final movie was released in 1976. Like, and for the most part, I think that Akira Kurosawa enjoyed his life. He was once asked by people, what is it you're trying to say? And I think he said something to the effect of, why can't people be better to each other? Which you wouldn't ever, that thought would never come to mind if you're watching an Alfred Hitchcock movie. It's more about sort of the spectacle of what's going on. So Akira Kurosawa was noted for he did either personal dramas or he did these samurai action films, and sometimes he could deftly blend the two together. He knew how to do human emotion as well as action, and he knew how to capture action like spectacularly. He was a real influence on a lot of filmmakers from Sergio Leone, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese. You could keep going on. And of course, Alfred Hitchcock, he was adored and worshipped by the French New Wave movement. Um, it's been said before, but he was really taken seriously as an artist when he did his interview with Francois Truffaut, who was sort of the hot thing at the moment, and who I probably ought to do a video about one day. It's really interesting. Hitchcock really did live in a world of good guys and bad guys. And I feel that Akira Kurosawa, he lived sort of in the transience of life, the sort of in between moments that we take for granted, like when we're waiting for something, or you just look at the corner of your eye and you see the clouds pass by. I feel that sort of best sums up his aesthetic. But anyway, I mean, they both had rough moments in their lives. There's a real difference between, both of their mothers. Hitch's mother was sort of this overbearing, sort of controlling person, and you see that in Psycho. There probably is a taste of her in that movie, and it's been noted that mother figures in Hitch's movies, they have it kind of bad. So there's a lot of theories about his mom. Another thing, contrast that to Akira Kurosawa. By his accounts, she was a woman of her era from like the Meiji Revolution. She was dedicated, stoic, and even though his dad was the real disciplinarian, he was a member of the military, he said that his dad was the one who is filled with emotion and passion. When Akira Kurosawa would leave his family's house, his dad would always watch as he left until he was too far to see. So it's interesting how the the contrast between those two personalities. Like I've seen a few Kurosawa. I'm going to dive into Kurosawa a bit more just because I feel that a lot of people know Alfred Hitchcock, but one of the things about Alfred Hitchcock, I'll say the last bit about Alfred Hitchcock and then I'll move on. But Alfred Hitchcock was one of those people who that we know a lot of weird people who really don't get to influence anything, and once they do, they're both kind of lauded and reviled at the same time. And so like that's got to have an effect on their work. Who knows how much of an effect it influenced Alfred Hitchcock. I do know that towards the end of his life, I think it was in 1979, he was working on a movie and then he had some medical issues and he called up the studios and said, I'm never going to be able to make another movie again. And in 1980, he passed away. And it would be another 18 years until Akira Kurosawa passed away. But I feel that Akira Kurosawa went out on a better note. Like his final years had like real masterpieces to them. He got to make Ran and Kagemusha, and his final movie, Madadayo, is seen as a companion piece to Ikiru. So in Ikiru, it's about a government bureaucrat who realizes he's got a couple months to live because of cancer, and he realizes he hasn't done anything worthwhile in his life. So he dedicates his final moments to building a playground for the neighborhood. And then the other half of the movie is back and forth between him doing that and his comrades at work discussing his life. And it ends with one of them at the end of their shift walking by the playground and then looking up to see the sunset. The the movie Madadayo is about a teacher who he maintains a strong bond with his student. He's done the opposite of the character in Ikiru. He's had relationships, he's built up bonds, and he lives life. And he still, it shows him like leaving teaching and becoming an author. And his students say, You'll always be our teacher to us. And he's moved to tears by that. And then it shows he has to endure hardship after World War II, but his students are still there for him. And every year they begin to celebrate his birthday. And at first it's almost like kind of a frat party, but as they all grow up and have families, it becomes more ceremonial. And in the movie, he loses a pet cat, and him and his wife are both sad about it, and they get another. And it shows that even if you live a really good life, there's going to be sad moments. But, it's still worthwhile. And him, that movie ends with him not feeling too well, and he's at one of his birthday ceremonies, and his students, they take him home. They lay him to rest, and his wife gets him some drinks. And they play that game where they say something and then he responds with Madadayo, which means not yet, roughly. And then it cuts, and then it pans in, it shows him in his room, and then it cuts to this field where a group of kids are playing this game in a hay field. And we see them making the call, and this one kid saying Madadayo, and they keep doing it again and again, and the kid hides in a haystack. But then he pops his head out and he looks up at the sky. He exits the haystack and he sees the sun setting. And it's left to our imagination of whether he's having a dream about his childhood or if he's died and gone to heaven. And that was the final film of Akira Kurosawa. I mean, this isn't a versus podcast about Hitchcock versus Kurosawa. Certainly there was a thrilling aspect of Alfred Hitchcock's work, but I can't say that there was a beautiful aspect like there was with Akira Kurosawa's work.